We're live. All right, thank you. Well, good evening, everybody. Again, my name is Blaine Smotherson, Third Ward City Councilman, but right now, Mayor Pro Tem, our mayor is not available, and we will proceed on. I'm wishing him safe and enjoyable travel. We also have another council member that is not here tonight. So we will get started, and I'm going to call this meeting to order at 5:30 on June 27th, 2022. Are there any changes to the agenda? Mr. Rose.
Mayor Pro Tem, I would recommend removing bill number 9469 from the agenda. That would be item M2. That is correct.
So I do apologize, right. May I get a motion on that amendment? Jeff Hales and Councilmember McMahon is a second. Is there any discussion? No discussion? Is that a roll call vote or is just a voice vote? All in favor? Nays? No nays. All right, that has been approved and for the amendment to the agenda, and we will move on. Mr. Rose.
Mayor Pro Tem Smotherson and council members, tonight we have before you an item that provides you with an update on the renovation projects, both the Annex and the Trinity building. We have with us Amanda Trumper, who is with Trivers and is the senior project manager for them, and Amanda will be doing the presentation tonight. I would ask that after the presentation, if you have any direction, please provide that to us. I know that we are prepared to respond to any questions that you have as well. So, Ms. Trumper.
Okay, yes, I'm live. Cool. Thanks for having me back. It's actually really nice to be here in person, so it's good to see everyone. So I will be presenting an update on what we presented to the community design review, and then some of the things that were better able to be clarified through that. So I'll kind of talk through that. There'd be a section where Derek, who's with me as well, who's our landscape architect, he'll be presenting on some of the site items. And then I'll also be giving an update on the process that we've done reviews with both sustainability and the historic commissions, just to kind of give you kind of a full breadth of kind of what's been going on since the last time we gave you an update. So that's my agenda. And then at the very end, we will have a review of the current cost estimate update that happened at the end of our DD documents, which was back in March of this year. So the community design review, we've started with sharing some of the public survey summary review that we did during the space needs study. And this was really foundational just to kind of bring everybody up to speed. Anybody who hadn't been in previous meetings and seen this stuff, I think most of this council has seen this data. So I'm going to go pretty quickly through some of these slides. This is stuff that I've presented before to council, but this is what we shared with the public. So to let them know kind of that the existing building stock, how much we have, how much we need, and that it really proved out in that study that, that we had enough existing building stock to make the case for this project and these two buildings. We also shared one of the things that was a driver for the one stop, which was listening to people and hearing what departments the public were visiting the most, which was Public Works, the police, planning and development, a city manager, management, and finance. And you'll see in this list, as you know, we've planned for each of these departments to have a presence at a one-stop counter in that new entry off of the connector. And some of the things we also shared, you've seen this before too, was just some of the pains that we've heard, City Hall, some of the challenges, the elevator and stairs, but the impression that it's beautiful and to kind of keep, that going. The police facility, some of its challenges where it's limited parking, which we've looked to solve with this project. And then the impression of giving them a permanent structure, which is something we've also been able to do with this project. And then just the summary of really the goals of the takeaways that we got from the space needs study that led to this project, which were improving public access to departments, sharing police and municipal courts programs, or separate, pardon, police and municipal courts programs, increased accessibility. This is ADA and all things accessible for kind of all abilities, and then revitalizing historically significant buildings in the city stock. So to kind of give, again, you as well as the public, just a overall of the project schedule, we did meet with the Green Practices and Historic Preservation Commissions on March 17th. On the 31st, we completed our design development submission. We had the community design review on May 17th of this year over at Human Park. And then tonight we're here with the City Council. Next steps for us are construction documents will be completed by the end of next month, the end of July, with a plan for bidding to happen over a couple of months' time with the construction start in the fall. I don't know if anybody on this council has seen this, but we did update our renderings at the DD deliverable. So this is an updated overall aerial view of the site. You see on the left, I don't know if I can do this. Yay. You can see on the left that we've got the connector and new entry that's fully accessible with a sloped walk. We're also showing kind of really the light touch that we're doing to the police annex facility, some of the windows that we're restoring at the clear stories over that break area that we've discussed before, as well the renovation to the Trinity and that new front entry that's going to go on there. So there's a new canopy and the building really kind of reverses its face. Project scope, this is all pretty familiar to this group, so I'll go pretty quickly through this. There's no work to City Hall in the scope. There's a one-stop shop for city services in the connector. The police headquarters is in the annex and the municipal courts is separate in the Trinity building. As far as architecture, our new main accessible entry point for City Hall and the police department is happening at this main entrance spot with this these kind of short-term parking spaces. We've got the one-stop area in the connector, accessible entrances and security checkpoints at each of these entries to these two buildings. Updated and new restrooms throughout both facilities. Structural retrofit as required for essential services is in the annex. And then the big thing that we're restoring the character defining features of both buildings. And some of the site work that we'll go into a little bit more detail in a moment is to remove the temporary police structures that we know are out in this parking area here, provide secure parking for police and a new Sally Port entrance, which is right there, and then provide for additional public parking, a lot more than what's currently on the site right now. So to give just a little bit more detail on the design development of the new main entry, we've got of course, the historic renovations to the annex, but then we have an opportunity to improve that facade of the connector. So with a small addition and a little bit of structural rework, we're able to provide kind of a new lobby and entry sequence. And again, fully accessible, much easier experience than I think climbing the stairs to City Hall or even coming kind of through the back door like we do right now. As well, so both for accessible design, but for historic, some of the materials that we're looking at using on the connector are compatible with the materials on the annex building. So we're using these kind of concrete panels that really have a lot of nice variation in texture to them and coordinate really well with the historic materials. As far as finishes, so some of the, we had this last design meeting with the police kind of in this beautiful room, and we took a lot of cues from the City Hall finishes. So you can see just kind of this palette. We've got some of these, kind of nice, easy blues, which are also really good for psychology and calming environments, as well as some really nice neutral things that really kind of tie into really the palette that's been established by City Hall, which is the predominant structure that, we all are just so happy to honor, but then kind of using these materials in a more contemporary way. So this, but brass accents, things like that, just really to kind of tie the campus together. And then this is an updated rendering of that connector one-stop area. So as you know, we're coming through a vestibule here at the bottom plan bottom. And as you come in, then we've got a little bit of space for queuing as well, entry through metal detection and a package scanner here. And then a kind of a information desk for someone to, to greet and kind of have eyes on that whole lobby. As well, we've provided for at least 20 seats of waiting, which was something that we vetted out with each of the departments, knowing that kind of through these archways, which is something like a historic reference to actually the former archways that were there before the connector was built around it. It was this kind of beautiful arched portico that connected both the city hall and the annex historically. So we're uncovering those, restoring those, and through those, be able to walk through kind of this first set of them, but then beyond is where we're putting the transaction counters for each department. So finance, planning and development, and and public works. And then the police records department is actually connected in through the annex building. And that records transaction is right here. So it's fully visible inside of that lobby. And then the entry into the police department is kind of straight at the end of this hallway. So as you come kind of off the elevator from City Hall, that would be kind of straight ahead. Very similar to the way you enter the annex right now. And then further development on the break area. So we talked about restoring these beautiful clear story windows that we've got this kind of really cool historic photo of when it was used for the women's magazine building. So restoring all that beautiful sunlight into the center of this large building. And then as well, just some really simple finishes, some really simple approaches to storage as well. We've heard that they don't really need a lot of storage. So we're being pretty austere with the ways in which we're treating millwork and storage there. And then just kind of some nice counters for break area, for enjoying a meal together, and just just kind of a best in class break area for police. And then as we go to the Trinity, that new main entry, we are achieving the goal of separating police from courts. We're also achieving the goal of accessible design. This entry being at grade versus the steps up that go to the historic entry on the opposite side of the building. And then we are replacing all of the windows, spot tuck pointing, some roof repairs, things like that to the exterior of the building. And then the courtroom, which will take also a nice historic renovation. So restoration to the bookshelves that are in there with the former Trinity reading room. We know this used to be a library and we want to keep a lot of that history there. So we're keeping all of that built-in casework. It's beautiful. Doing some light restoration to the wood that's needed. And then we are going to incorporate in a new dais for courts. And we're coming up on the site slide, so I'm going to have Derek present on that.
All right. Thanks, Amanda. Can everybody hear me okay? My name is Derek Don, landscape architect with DG2 Design. Our team's been working alongside Amanda and the Trivers team from the beginning of the project. This diagram here you've probably seen before, but the dashed yellow line is really the scope or extent of the site work for this project. So with the site plan itself, I have a couple other diagrams that kind of depict entries, circulation, those types of things. For reference, north is to the right of this image. So the public parking on the north side where the current police trailers are today. Again, Amanda kind of went over that, the temporary parking of the new connector entry. And then really the center of the site, the bulk of the site is utilizing some of the existing parking lots and creating that to the secure core of the site. And I'll cover a little bit of that in more detail here in a couple slides. Thinking about the secure police parking and staff parking, it was important to have two entry points. So there would be one from the Trinity side on the west side. There'd also be one from Mike King Drive. Those would both be designated for police and staff entry points. Those would be a vehicular gate, so a quick closing gate with a badge reader for when the cars pull up. Those would open and close right behind them. And then on the north and south of those are again the public entry points off of Mike King Drive. So all public entry for visitors would be off Mike King Drive. There is a drop off at the connector for temporary parking, and there's also a drop off lane close to the ramp and stairs at the new Trinity entry as well, along with ADA parking in both locations. And now to cover the parking, one of the challenges on this site was trying to create a center core while still trying to provide the public kind of an inviting and welcoming site, and also trying to maximize parking. One of the parking's critical for these operations of these buildings here on campus. So again, on the north side, we have, trying to look at that, sorry, 71 total spaces for public, counting the 5 ADA or the 5 temporary spaces at the connector entry and the large public lot on the north. And in the secure core, there are 67 spaces that we have been able to provide within the secure fence. This may help a little bit too. So almost a year ago, whenever our team kicked off some of the design work, although virtually, we had meetings with Chief Hampton, Captains Morley and Lemons to really talk about the needs for the police to make sure that's going to function and operate at its peak. So really, that bubble diagram on the top right is really kind of a breakdown of how the site would operate, right? Where you have the secure core at the buildings, basically taking up the center, and then again, the public zones on the north and south. So using that and some of the grade challenges that we have on the site from south to north, the site actually does slope quite a bit from south to the north. Thinking about where those brake lines are going to be, how are we going to have the secure parking for police for the Sally Port, but still make it as welcoming and inviting as possible. So the security design in conjunction working with Chief Hampton and the captains and input from others, even here with facilities. Again, that red line here would be a continuous security fence. It's an 8-foot tall anti-climb fence. I actually have a sample of it here if anybody wants me to hold it up. It's a little heavy, so I can bring it around if you're curious. But what anti-climb does, it doesn't allow you to get your fingertips or even toes into the fence to climb. So it does create that secure perimeter for the police activity within the center of the campus. But yet it's still visible. You can still see through it because of bringing the public along Mike King Drive and then back the sidewalk to the Trinity building. And that new entry, we want to make sure we're not creating blind corners and blind spots. So it's still going to be transparent, but provide that security that is desired. The blue line there onto the, let me see if I can point to that for you. So this blue line here is basically the black wrought iron ornamental fence that's out there today. That would maintain its current location. There would be some repairs, refurbishment as needed. And then that fence would connect to the, what is at the northwest corner of the Trinity building to really, in essence, create a enclosed perimeter for that parking lot for the public. The secure fence again would have vehicular access points and also 3 man gates that would be card reader only for police and city staff. Some of the images here, so the security fence, there's an image of it, and again have the sample here, but that is the security fence, the matching vehicular gates and pedestrian gates. And then the ornamental fence here, the black 4-foot ornamental fence would maintain the taller solid PVC fence that kind of reads as a solid wall. That would be removed as part of this project. Just a couple other images that we've included for some of the site fencing. You know, the historic character of the buildings, not only on this campus, but also adjacent at the Lewis Center, Lewis Collaborative, with their black ornamental fence that runs parallel to their parking lot, and then basically would be the same fence for continuity, for character along the north side, along Harvard and Trinity Avenues. We know that there's already an existing pedestrian gate there. You can tell that that's getting some use with the kind of the cow path, the foot traffic through the lawn area. So we are cognizant of the materials that are being used there and really want to maintain that kind of historic garden kind of quality, if you will, with that fence type. We also know that landscaping is going to be an important component to this project. We've met with UCD and Bloom to review kind of where we were early on in the project, things that would work well, that won't work well, maintenance limitations, all those fun things. This section right here really focuses on the edge from the parking lot to Trinity Avenue with the adjacent residential. We're cognizant of needing this to feel like it's part of the neighborhood, but also needing to maintain things like blocking headlights, but yet still creating that kind of that garden quality, if you will. That image on the upper left is a view of that existing conditions where there is canopy trees along the street. There's some layered landscape in there. There would be evergreens. There would be some other new shrubs that we would provide that would provide, again, that screening. So in the wintertime and there's visitors and public pulling into those spaces, it would limit the headlights that would be shining across the street. The graphic on the right, again, is that section cut The light green trees are all the existing trees. We are doing our absolute best to protect the large trees, the street trees, the large trees on the campus, being cognizant of that. And then all the other, the lighter kind of, or I guess the darker green and more yellow trees along that edge are the ornamental and evergreen trees that are going to provide some of that varying landscape palette seasonality along that edge. And again, just a few images. I couldn't help myself thinking about the landscape palette. So things like some of the cedars, some native pines, yellowwood, so all native or native cultivars for the plant palette, thinking about the seasonality, the landscape character that would not only be along this edge, but would be throughout the campus as well. Also thinking about site materials. You know, we know that this needs to be site materials that are complementary to the architecture, the historic character of the buildings, not to take away from what's happening there. So there'll be some standard broom finish concrete. There will be also the city sidewalks would be the exposed aggregate that matches the rest of the public sidewalks here along Del Mar and around City Hall. There's some accent colored bands really at the drop off at the connector where there's a temporary parking that really defines the drive and parking from the public walkways. Those are also ringed with those security bollards. So those are crash rated bollards. That was also another request from the chief to make sure that cars would be protected, or the building would be protected from cars that would be approaching the building at the public entry point. Those also serve as our way to illuminate or light that public drop off. So we're not having a lot of other poles taken away from the character of the images that Amanda shared just a little bit ago. Thinking about the brick and limestone caps or precast caps that would mimic what's out there now. So those are some material palettes that would also be both at the connector entry and the Trinity to provide that continuity for those public spaces right outside of those buildings. The handrails, so those would be stainless steel illuminated handrails, very similar to the character that's out here now at the main entry to City Hall. So again, bringing that same palette and kind of design style to the stairs, both at connector and Trinity as well. Real quickly, I know enough to be dangerous on the civil side. Our civil engineers is not with us tonight, but Shay from CDI has been working with MSD to preliminary plans, and what MSD then said that we would need to do is to be able to hold some underground detention for both our volume and flood protection on site. So the way that we're doing that is with, I think this graphic may be a little bit outdated. I think he was able to actually cut that down to just 2 of those long chambers, but those are underground, basically cisterns that hold the water and then release it at a much slower rate. So it's accommodating what we need to do for this site, but also helping for any downstream issues that MSD has noted for our project. And I believe that, I don't know, Amanda, was this? Okay, so that's what I had for the site. Happy to answer any other questions here at the end. Again, if you want to see the sample of the fence, I'm happy to bring that up for your viewing pleasure.
So yeah, so I guess it's kind of the takeaways for what we're doing with the site is, you know, the neighborhood adjacency improvements are something that we've been really mindful of throughout the whole project. So, you know, some of the decreased neighborhood traffic by really pointing the site toward Mike King Drive, really just that one entry point, which is really, you know, emergency vehicles only on the Trinity side. So that reorientation really should start to focus traffic away from the neighborhood streets. And then the fencing enhancements that we just kind of talked about, you know, removing that PVC fencing, which is, you know, not like the decorative wrought iron, but it's right in front of it. So we can keep the wrought iron, get rid of the PVC, and then the layered approach to landscaping as well. The site lighting, we didn't touch on too specifically with this, but we are doing a dark sky approach to the lighting. So all full cutoff and responsible to the night sky as well. And then just a quick update on the other commissions that we presented to. So we presented basically the mechanical systems. We also presented some of the stormwater strategies because water is another part of, you know, green practices, but just to kind of fold this also in, the mechanical systems, we are meeting the University City's sustainability goals in regards to enhanced energy efficiency. So we've got a system that fits within the historic building, which is also kind of tricky, but we've found really great units to do that without taking away from the building. We've got high efficiency systems and a high degree of space control by the system in which we're using. That kind of comes built into this really efficient package. Some of the characteristics are distributing cooling loads, separated dedicated outdoor air systems, and we're minimizing large ducts through the spaces, which is also going to be really good for the historic nature of the buildings. And like I said, it's highly efficient and it decouples outdoor air from space cooling. And some of this is just a snip from the University Cities Code about the goals to improve upon the baseline energy strategies. And then these are the preliminary calculations showing that we are improving over the city's minimum goals. And then the Historic Preservation Commission, I wanted to give an update. We did not cover too deeply on this in the community design review, and we got a lot of questions about it kind of at the end. And so I wanted to kind of put this into kind of the official, kind of presentation of what's happening, realizing that that session was a closed session. So I just kind of wanted to make sure that it's out there. So all the preservation stuff, we've done a lot of research on these buildings. We've been working on this campus for a while now. I think Trevor did the renovations to City Hall like 15 years ago. So we've continued to learn more and more, but the historic significance of the annex, it being, the press annex, it was constructed in 1903. It was deconstructed and reconstructed in 1908. And then the kind of expansion of it happened in 1910, which is really kind of what we know it to be today, except that a fire took a portion of it. So we have what's left. So the fire in 1940 took several of the bays. We have 5 original bays remaining. They've been modified over time. You can kind of see in this, image, we know that was modified for fire department. We're not trying to recreate that facade. We're actually using that as a building like iconography moment. So it could have a police logo on or something like that. We are infilling it, but we're not trying to carefully needle back in historic detailing, which would be very difficult to do successfully. So we found a way to make that make sense with the current program. As well, the history of the building, the Women's Magazine was acquired for UCity's City Hall in 1930, which is the building that we're in now. And then the press annex was used to house the police and fire departments in 1934. So we're kind of coming back to its roots in some ways, in the way at which it was built. We also know that the City Hall Plaza Historic District is the area that we're working in. And so we're assigning all of the things that you would do to historic preservations to this campus project. As much as it's not necessarily a historic tax credit project, we are following all those rules. Trevor's, does a lot of historic projects. It's a really big part of what we do. And so we're treating all those at the Secretary of the Interior standards that would be expected. So recognizing the period of significance of the site, which is 1902 to 1912, including the Trinity building in that site, even though it was built a little bit later, but we're still treating it as a historically significant structure. And then the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. There are many different standards to follow: restoration, rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is the one that does allow us to modify the building to meet current needs. And that also, though, does protect all of the really character defining features that we've talked about: the windows, restoring clear stories. Some of the monumental stairs that will remain in the building will also be restored. So some of the key features of interest, we are doing a seismic upgrade to the annex building, but to be clear, it's all interior work, and it's all protecting windows where we can, infilling where we need to for security purposes, but for the most part, those will still be they will be visually windows from the outside. So basically all of these modifications, again, are being done in a way in which to minimize kind of the alteration of the building. And then on the Trinity, the big project on the Trinity building is the windows. The annex building windows were replaced several years ago. We just have to kind of frame them in and kind of trim them out on the interior. So we've got a lot of really great windows to work with already, but the Trinity windows are original, single pane, not very efficient. So we are replacing all those with double pane and historic profiles. And then this is just an image of just kind of the state of the windows. They're not, they've, taken a beating over the years. But this is the original drawings that we had the privilege of being able to reference. So we kind of know what the original designs were and, what we can do to really, even the modifications that we're doing to the back of the Trinity, which is not its historically significant elevation according to historic standards, but we are maintaining all of those archways. We're putting, glass and entries into those, and really using all of the existing, you can see right here, really kind of honoring all of the existing geometries of that building, with just a simple canopy over it for entry. As well, the historic stair that goes up to the Trinity Reading Room, which is on the west side of the building, the former main entry, that is being restored. Plaster is being repaired, all these lintels and things. And then, as I said in that earlier slide, all of this woodwork is being restored. And in fact, even the radiators will be removed, but we will be able to use these cases for the new mechanical. So we're able to kind of get creative with that. One thing that I didn't mention that I would like to is that there was something brought up kind of one-on-one at the end of the community design review. I don't think I've made it explicit that the one-stop shop is really a place for an ancillary worker from each of the departments to be. The departments are not all moving into the one-stop. I think there was a little confusion about, someone asked, well, who's going to be in City Hall if they're all going to be in the one-stop? And I just wanted to kind of make it explicit in this opportunity to say that that will have an employee that will be kind of hoteling down in that space for ease of public interaction, but that the departments will remain in City Hall in their totality. And so for the cost estimate, really not a lot of things changed from the last estimate. We've got more material selections. We've got development of the new entries and canopies a little bit further along. But mostly it's what's related to truly design development. So instead of just kind of guesses or allowances from the cost estimator, we've got real numbers to things. Now, I will say that there was an increase from the SD estimate. We weren't surprised by this. Escalation continues to be a very real thing. And so at each checkpoint, we're seeing he's using real numbers and applying real escalation to this. Normally, you'd see escalation estimates kind of reduce as you got further along in a project. Right now, because of the volatility of the market, we're not doing that. We're trying to keep in that amount of safety net, really, for kind of trying to guess where the market's going to be when this actually goes to bid. So this last estimate was performed on April 26th of 2022. We'll obviously be going to bid later this summer. But some of the deviations that we saw between the Annex and Trinity, the deviations are getting less from the space needs study to SD to DD, which is good. These kind of fluctuations happen, but they level out as we get more detail. But the project is up 1.8 million from the previous estimate. And this is not scope changes. These are not, we haven't added scope to the project. We've been really good about making sure that that's true. This is just kind of the market. I've heard that steel as well was one of the big things that changed in the project, and some of that is in the seismic upgrades, things that we're not removing at this time. So just a quick summary of kind of line by line, the Annex and connector building. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble seeing it from here, but went up by about 750,000. The Trinity building, about 450, and the site work, about 218. And those are pretty good relative to the cost of each. So yeah, so the overall kind of high-low is that the previous estimate were up by about 9%, with escalation kind of holding in that same range. And then just kind of last thing to just kind of update everybody here about the next steps. We're doing the council update this evening. We've submitted for a lot consolidation plan. That was partly to kind of simplify the MSD process and treat the whole site as one. It was actually kind of two different lots. So that's happened. We have submitted our site development plan for site development plan review. So that is actually already in the works. I don't think it's come to council yet, but we've submitted that package. And then we are going to do, and this, I've got a meeting set up, I believe this week, to talk about the procurement review and prep for how the city wants to bid out the project. So our meeting schedule is kind of shown. We're basically meeting with that whole consortium, including police, about once a month. We've got one more coming up in July. Any last minute questions, anything that we need to refine. And then our construction documents are going to be complete on July 29th. With bidding and construction to follow. And that's it.
Okay, Mr. Rose, is there anything comments from you, or should I open this for questions by the council?
Mayor Pro Tem Smothers and council members, one item that was not discussed is the financing end of it. And so once we have if you elect to move forward, once the item is bid, then after we know what the price is going to be, we'll seek the financing in. So likely certificates of participation is the mechanism that will be used. If you recall, in the budget that you recently approved, you set aside $900,000 for the initial debt service payment, and that those funds are coming from $200,000 from general fund, $300,000 from capital fund, and then $400,000 from public safety fund. So at this point, I would be open to answering any questions that you have.
Okay, I'll open the floor for questioning, and it looks like Mr. Hales is going to be first up.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Smotherson. When I received this packet, I think electronically last Thursday, I think the details on the buildings look terrific. I did go back through and watch the January 24th presentation. The first thing that jumped out at me is that fence. And so we've been talking about this fence, and the history of this fence and the need for secured parking is not lost on me. It was identified as something that was needed in your analysis initially over 2 years ago. It was also identified as a need by a separate analysis back in 2014. In the last meeting, the chief referenced and this may be a question for him as well, referenced the security fencing, and I believe that the security fencing is best practices, but I know that the chief referenced this is one of the measures that does go into accreditation of the department as well. My question about the fence, I've looked at other police stations. I know that Clayton was referenced. I believe Clayton does have, as I walked by it the other day, perhaps a gate on the interior that comes down that may secure the entire space. I don't know. During the day, though, it is only key card access, but there's a gate arm like a parking garage. So my question is relative to the fence. What discretion is there? Are there priorities as far as the materials, the type of fence, the appearance of the fence? Because I would not characterize that as decorative.
No, that's a good question. I don't think this has ever been described as decorative. The decorative fence that was referred to in the packet is the ornamental fence, the existing ornamental fence. There's a few that are out on the market for these anti-climb fences as actually we've specified that to be around the entire MLS facility downtown. That was really a request from Chief Hampton to have it as anti-climb and 8 foot tall with the vehicular gates that would be on the card readers.
Okay, and then in doing some research about standards on the internet, there's a lot available. Does this particular fence meet every single criteria of the standard? And one of the standards I read was the fence needs to be buried, the actual screening portion needs to be below the grade level of the ground to prevent people from digging under it. And that seems kind of far-fetched to me as a real life scenario. It also talked about, what I read was the fencing should be screened from both sides to prevent people from seeing, ideally from seeing through it, I suppose. But is what's been proposed in this iteration, does that go underground, or are we following absolutely every aspect of the best practices, or do we have?
And I believe the best practice blog that you had provided was by a blog for, I believe that was a product by Fentress that they actually provide and manufacture certain fence types.
Okay.
So by that guide, this fence would not be buried the 6 feet, but the footings, this does go right to grade. There are cameras that would be out in the parking lot around this fence type. So I don't know exactly which criteria the chief had suggested for this fence, but this was really their criteria for anti-climb again. So if there's other ones that you want us to look into, we're happy to look at other manufacturers for these fence types and the detailing of them.
Yeah, personally, I can only speak for myself. I do appreciate the desires of the chief and the department. I think that has to come with from balance of a product that actually can fit the sort of historic character of the area that it's in. I do have one other question, if the Mayor Pro Tem will allow me. That is,
May I
does,
speak to one of
Yep.
one of your other questions? Actually, you asked about transparency, right? And that blog said, that it should be completely opaque and not be able to be visible through at all. And the chief actually was verbal about not wanting to create a complete block, a public block to this. We kind of talked about, creating blind corners and things like that for wayfinding. So in his opinion, the semi-transparency of this fence is actually a good thing for his purposes, and also trying to be respectful of seeing through the site and the neighborhood and things like that. So I just want to kind of let you
okay.
know that.
Sorry, Councilmember Hales, one other thing too, early on, one of the other bubble diagrams that we had in there was, again, the secure site in the center. There are several different options that we had previously looked at early on, where it had the secure parking to the north, more public toward the south, but then you started intermixing where police and secure core would have to leave and then go into the public zone and into the building. So we really tried to massage exactly where that secure core was to provide optimal operations for the police department.
Right, and I know that the location for this was the biggest challenge. You've talked about it, I think, just about every time you've presented to everyone. Can you tell me how, what goes into the number of spaces that you are saying are needed for the secure area, and how you got to that point?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. So when we were doing our programming during the space needs study, HOK did a previous study, even when we studied the annex prior to that, did a bunch of programming with the police. So that also established, we established not only our square footage needs for their program, but also their parking needs. So that target of 67, 66 spaces is fully related to the programming that we did with police, and then updated at the beginning of schematic design for this project.
Okay, anyone else? Councilmember Clay.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Smotherson, and thank you for your presentation. This might be a question actually more for either the city manager or even Chief Hampton, as we're endeavoring to invest significant dollars in the new police headquarters in particular. I've gotten a couple of questions from the community about utilization. A belief that most officers spend most of their time in their cars. And so the need for such a facility, it's my understanding that there's several personnel who aren't actual officers who work within the police department. And the police department is their office. That's where they reside. That's where they break. That's where they do the things they need to do. In addition to much of the training occurs in the department. Can either the city manager or Chief Hampton speak to the utilization of the facility, how it will be used, why it needs to be the way that we have designed it?
Mayor Pro Tem Smotherson, Councilmember Clay, I will kick it off, and then I will ask Chief Hampton to chime in as well. I think, keep in mind that a great number of the employees are going to be there at the police facility for 8-10 hours a day. So think about the dispatchers, think about the command staff, and the other secretarial type of employees, where it's true that the police officer's office is primarily their vehicle. They also will be using this facility as well. There will be report writing, interrogations. So there are a number of, there is an amount of activity that police officers conduct that simply does not happen in their vehicle. And so those are the things that initially come to mind. And I would ask Chief Hampton to come up and comment, especially if I'd left something out.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council, Mr. Rose. That is accurate. There's about approximately a number of 30 to 35 officers that their main focus is within the police building. That includes clerks, investigators, dispatchers, all type of staff that have to stay there within that confines. Now, the officers like Mr. Rose alluded to, there we do encourage rolling offices and understanding the importance of community patrols at all times. But yes, there are quite often times that paperwork has to be processed, i.e. a car accident. That car accident has to be entered right away, i.e. a person that is arrested has to be entered right away into that restraint. So yes, there is a very delicate need of going back and forth within this secured zone. That we also have violent criminals coming back and forth within this secured zone.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Smothers, a couple of other questions, sir. In terms of the, I think Ms. Trumper spoke to this somewhat, the utilization of City Hall versus the utilization of the connector. And what I mean for, we have many citizens involved and interested in all aspects of this design and this project. But for most folks, they just want to know when this is all done, if I need a permit, what do I do? How do I get there? So can you talk about the, and I'm thinking of this as I'm a kinesthetic learner. So I'm thinking of it from this, I'm driving to City Hall to transact business. I'm parking, I'm in that area north of the secured parking. I want to get a permit. So I want to go to planning and development. I'm north in that secured parking. Where do I walk? Well, what's my path to get to the connector? If I need more significant help than is providing the connector, how do I then get into City Hall? Kind of walk me through that process if I were an average citizen needing to transact business.
Absolutely. Thank you. Happy to. So I'll go back to a site slide. It's a little further back. All right. I think this one does a pretty good job of it, of describing public parking approach. So we do have the large public lot here. We also have 5 parking spaces right in front of the connector. And the hope is that, most of these city things, permits, paying it, refuse bill, things that happen in these kind of short spans will be able to be covered by this short-term public parking. If that's full, then you would be directed to move down the site and into this larger public realm. We've done a lot with the landscape and the paving and the landscaping to really kind of encourage this kind of open kind of plaza. So it's a larger sidewalk. It's materially the same as the sidewalk that we're doing to improve all the way to this area. So there's a lot of like material wayfinding cues that we're using as well. All of the crossings are fully accessible now. And so we've got really good accessible routes from parking to the city. So if this is full, you're welcome to park here. Or if you know that you're going to be here for a 2-hour meeting for whatever reason, then that would be the more appropriate place to park. When you arrive on the site, whether by car or by walking or by bus, you could be coming from Del Mar. You would enter into this kind of other plaza. So it's kind of an enlarged zone where we've got, a nice wide parking or a nice wide sidewalk, as well as a really generous sloped walk. The sloped walk is a nuance that I like to point out. But we don't have a ramp going into this building, and there's a difference. A sloped walk is actually a lower grade. It's actually limited at 1 to 20, where ramps can go up to 1 to 12. And that's even more accessible. So we're trying to apply a lot of enhanced accessibility and universal design standards to this approach. Once you enter into this building, then you come into a vestibule, and then there's the metal detection and package scan, and I can show that in that previous render. So once we come into this room here, this is what you'll see. You'll see some areas for waiting. You'll see each of the transaction counters. Ideally, there would be some wayfinding that happens that says Finance, Public Works, some signage that happens, not dissimilar to a lot of the signage that happens around the city right now. But if you have a question, there's going to be somebody sitting right here. to help direct you, to help you understand, kind of orient you. So this plan, you're able to access, one or two people, and I'm sure they'll staff it kind of as needed, depending on the ebb and flow of the day. Maybe Wednesday's really crazy for planning and development, and they'll have a couple extra people down there. But it's meant to be really that initial touch base. Now, if you've got, a big meeting or questions that can't be answered at this space, then you'll be directed to go into City Hall. So the same way that we kind of go into City Hall from that, accessible rear lot right now, we'll go into City Hall. You can either take the stairs, hopefully not, or you can take the elevator up to where the departments still live. So their vestibules will still be there. The planning and development, transaction counter will still be up on that space. And so that's really meant to be things that can't be handled, either quickly, or if it's just, giant rolls of drawings, it really should just be, take them upstairs, help us out. That kind of thing will still happen.
And City Manager Rose, this may be more of a question for you. So I need an occupancy permit. The thought is I can get that in this connector space,
Mayor Pro Tem Smothers.
something relatively simple.
Councilmember Clay, that's exactly it. Our intention is to try and set a location where I'd say 60 to 70% of the transactions that occur on a daily basis can be taken care of. And so we hope to have representation from all of the departments that deal with development or code enforcement and such, so that you're not going from floor to floor to conduct business. You can go to this one area, have representation from the departments, and get your issue taken care of more quickly. So we're hoping that it will be more efficient processes than what we have today.
Thank you.
Mr. Cusick.
Thank you, Mayor. Excuse me. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Smothers. And I have just two quick questions. All through your program, you talked about accessibility, and on the elevator ride up, one of the people in the elevator says something about ADA compliance. So when we look at accessibility, you of course are taking into consideration all sorts of ADA compliance issues. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. We have a Cohen Hilberry Associates are our on-team accessibility consultant for this, and we've had extensive reviews on everything, both from the public side and as well from employee work areas. And yeah, we're looking at it very, very closely.
Thank you for that. And then just to state it for the public record, there will be no type of fence around City Hall proper, correct?
City Hall is completely out of scope for this project.
Thank you.
Okay, if there be no more questions, I did have one myself, and I just wanted to make sure all our council members were able to ask their questions. But my question is specifically for the city manager, and that is, and I wanted to actually address the fencing, and I'll be very quickly. Does the fencing have to be approved by the Board of Adjustments? Because right now there is no fencing in Civic Plaza in reference to the Annex or City Hall. And then my question after that is, if not, why does it not need approval?
As a part of this process, what we've done is looked at what are we legally obligated to do. And I think both Trivers as well as our city attorney are aware of what those processes are. And so for any board, committee, or commission that was included in that process, we think that Trivers or the other staff have made those presentations and gone through the required steps. Good example is the Planning Commission that we're sending the site plan information to them because that's legally part of the process. So I'm not aware. What I can tell you is that we can take a look into it. I'm not aware that it is required to go before the Board of Adjustments, and the response would be because we're not legally obligated to do so.
Okay, and the reason I asked that question is because, we have a a resident in our district in Ward 3 that actually is looking to extend a fence to the end of her driveway. And she literally has to go to the Board of Adjustments for a variance, to request a variance. But so my question is, why would there be a difference between a resident who is looking, who has a nuisance house next door to her and is looking for the same security and protection our police are looking for? And trust me, I understand why we need the protection for our police officers and in reference to parking, but I'm just trying to understand why there would be a difference in reference to protection and security for that resident, but we're going to apply it for our officers.
Mayor Pro Tem, we have gone through a process that we're required to do based upon the policies that you have in place. If there's a desire to change those policies, then that's something that we can certainly look into for residents and bring that information back to you. But I would suspect that if the resident is going through that process, it's because our policies require them to do so, where it does not currently require the city to do so.
Okay, well, thank you, sir. I definitely understand that. The last thing that I will say before we adjourn the study session, okay, Councilmember Hales. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I just wanted to squeeze in a couple more points. As a follow-up on this security fencing, I really would like to see other potential options moving forward, or possibilities for options. Number two, one of the comments that I think was feedback in the public community session was access from University Heights through the public parking lot. And I just want to make sure that was heard. I think that's a fairly commonly trafficked pathway for folks to get from the loop back home and also to the library, particularly when it's open. And then the diagram of the parking there, the 5 spaces next to the connector building, are the parallel spaces on Mike King still there? I know they're currently staff parking, but are they, could they be additional public parking for people visiting the building?
Thank you, Councilmember Hales. So in order, we can definitely look at other options for the security fencing, including, maybe it's not black. There's some things that we could do to maybe minimize its appearance. So we can absolutely look at that. The walkthrough, we heard those comments too about the walk through the site and the, what we were showing right here, this new, well, it's reused ornamental fencing that's coming across here. And we took that question to Chief Hampton, and I actually have an email pulled up, kind of his response to the need for that. The other thing we did kind of want to share the slide because there is currently a pass-through, and I know it goes through the Lewis Center Collaborative, but that pass-through doesn't get affected by this project. So that there will still be kind of a cross-site connection. We can't rely on the private side to necessarily maintain that, but we wanted to acknowledge that it exists. But when we asked the chief to make a recommendation or further kind of explain the need for this, because I wanted to make sure that I could speak more fully to his concerns and the need for that fence too. I knew that this would come up. That what he shared with me was the concerns for employees and public's well-being and having a secured lot free of vandals, robbers, and assault perpetrators far outweigh the minor walk around from this area. We currently have this area secured for UCPD activities via security gate in the current plan. And this has been set up since, early on in the project. So comparing a dated layout prior to 2016 with the ability to update and make sure all persons, especially employees late at night, have safe passage to and from our properties is vital. We understand everyone is not going to agree on the design or layout, but many of my civilian employees who are not combat trained desire a secure location to enter their vehicles after working late hours. It also follows the crime prevention through environmental design tenants, SEPTED, we all kind of know this.
Right. I was not
Sorry.
referring to a cut through the secure area. I was referring
Correct.
to the public side on the north side front of the library.
And as we understand it, we're just trying to reduce porosity as well. It is a 4-foot fence. I suppose it could be jumped over, but there is a desire to reduce porosity through the site so that it's a little bit more able to be monitored and understood who's kind of passing through. You kind of let pass through happen. It can go in both directions, was kind of what we heard.
If that be all, okay. I just have one more statement before we adjourn, and I'll end it with this, and I'll simply say, and thank you very much for your presentation. But before we adjourn, I simply want to say that because I am the dissenting opinion on this, on the council, I will say that you're placing an apple among oranges. And the only reason that apple requires security, and that security is a fencing. If there was no apple among those oranges, then there would be no fencing, and you would have an open and accessible, free-flowing plaza. So I'll adjourn this meeting at 6:30, and we'll start the council meeting in 5 minutes to allow the council to take a break, and we will start at 6:35. Thank you.